outrageous. Everybody knows what the world's international currency is supposed to be. Anybody can use it for anything. But now Washington has started putting sanctions on people. It is ruining America. Now everybody is frantically looking for something to compete with the dollar. The Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, the Brazilians, the Iranians are all working as fast as they can to come up with something to compete with the US dollar. But we're shooting ourselves in the foot. Every day, the US dollar will no longer be the world's medium of exchange and the international currency.
What is happening with the US dollar is the end of the US dollar because an international currency is supposed to be neutral, but in Washington, they are now changing the rules. Now, if in Washington does not like you, they put sanctions on you and you cannot use US dollars.
War has never been good for anything. I mean, Daniel, this whole thing starts because, in 2014, the State Department, our State Department, instigated a coup in Kiev, threw out the people who were elected, and now we're paying the price for it. And we've been trying to move NATO to Ukraine ever since. I mean, it's absolute madness. This war should not be happening. None of this should be happening. I don't think it matters to us at all if Ukraine is close to Russia. Somebody, some bureaucrat, her name is Victoria Nuland, if you want to know, instigated this whole coup, and now we're all paying a gigantic price for it.
And that's a really good point, Jim, that I just want to elaborate on, because I think there's not enough focus on the fact that this has been brewing over years. This is not something that obviously occurred overnight. What should have been done differently?
Well, what should have been done differently is we shouldn't have instigated the coup. And, back in 2008, we said we're going to put Ukraine and Georgia in NATO, and the Russians got a little upset, as you can imagine they would, and said, no, no, no. And we've been drumming it into their heads ever since that we're going to put Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, and the Russians have said, oh my God, you're not going to do that. We're not going to let you. Daniel, let's suppose Russia had an alliance with Mexico and they started stationing troops in Mexico and missiles and tanks. What do you think we would do? We'd say, oh my gosh, it's so good. Let's drink vodka together. But they'd send an army down there and run them away, just as they did in Cuba. This never should have happened. We should not have done what we did. The Russians should have somehow made it clear that this would be an act of war, and the war should go on peacefully as it can. Yes, it's outrageous. Everybody knows what the world's international currency is supposed to be. Anybody can use it for anything. But now Washington, in the last few years, has started putting sanctions on people. Daniel, it is ruining America, ruining parts of America, because now everybody is frantically looking for something to compete with the dollar. The Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, the Brazilians, the Iranians are all working as fast as they can to come up with something to compete with the US dollar for political reasons, also economic reasons. I mean, America is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, but we're shooting ourselves in the foot every day. This means that now, sooner than it would have been, the US dollar will no longer be the world's medium of exchange and the international currency. That's not good for the US. It certainly was not good for Britain, which used to be the world's international currency. When they lost that status, well, they lost a lot of things.
It makes me think of a recent quote I read from Charlie Munger, who said he's working with the thesis that in 100 years' time, there will be no US dollar.
Well, no currency has lasted forever. No number one currency has ever lasted forever. If you go back and look at history, we've had international currencies, or the world's medium of exchange. Maybe they lasted 80 years, 100 years, 150 years max. They've all changed. It's changed over and over and over ever since the beginning of time. The US has been on top for a while, but now, as I said, we are the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. And now we will not let the US dollar stay neutral. Now we're using it as a political or an instrument of war. So that means nobody in his right mind who thinks they might cross the U.S. someday is going to want to use U.S. dollars. I don't think I'm ever going to cross the U.S. dollar, the U.S., the State Department, but I worry. Now I got to figure out something else, some other place to keep my money.
Jim, do you think whatever comes next and replaces it will be in the form of a digital dollar in whatever currency?
Well, there's no question that all money is going to be on the computer soon. In China, you can't even take a taxi with money. There, you can't take a taxi with their money. You can't buy an ice cream with money. You have to have your money on the computer. Every country's working on it, including the U.S., Washington, D.C. So soon, all money is going to be on the computer. But I am sure, Daniela, when the money's here and Washington says, okay, this is money now, I don't think that the bureaucrats in Washington will say, okay, but if you want to use somebody else's money, you want to use those things over there, you can. Bureaucrats don't like to lose control. They don't like to lose power. They don't like to lose monopoly.
Looking at oil prices, they're nearing 100% gain year over year. And gasoline prices in the U.S. reached over $4 and the highest level since '08. So I was reading that in recent cycles, when oil gained 100% in a one-year period, including '08, a recession occurred. The fears of a recession concern you?
Of course, it's been 12 years since we had the last recession in the U.S. That's the longest in American history. So we're overdue just on a time basis. I mean, it could last 20 years. Who says couldn't go on forever, but it never has. So I am sure because of inflation higher, which will drive interest rates higher, we're going to have a recession in the foreseeable future. I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just telling them that's the way it's always worked since the beginning of time. So yes, we're going to have a recession, probably fairly soon. You should read Stansberry. They'll tell you when the recession's coming. They're smarter than I am. And when the recession comes, a lot of us are going to get hurt. I hope I survive. I hope we all survive, but some people are going to get hurt.
I believe you recently said, Jim, that once the war's over, the stock market could see another hurrah, but then there'd be a downturn events.
Well, that's my view. I'm not good at market timing, but my view is something is going to cause this thing in Ukraine to calm down fairly soon. It's not doing Putin any good. It's not doing anybody any good. So who knows what? If he can find a way to save face, things will stop. That will lead to a big rally, especially since central banks are not so aggressive right now. We'll have the big rally and be the last rally. I hope that if it works that way, that I'm smart enough to sell that last rally. It'll probably be a big rally, because then people say, gosh, nothing can go into the stock market now. And then it'll be the end.
Well, let's look at commodities, Jim. Obviously, you're probably the greatest commodities expert on the planet. Everything from wheat to nickel, gold, as we're speaking right now, over $2,000 an ounce. Everything's soaring in the commodity space. How long does this go on for?
Well, probably for a while now. Commodities had a decade or so where they were in the tank for many reasons, while people were putting their money into bonds and stocks and property in some countries. I would suspect, since supply and demand have gotten out of whack in most commodities, that the commodity bull market will last a long time. They're printing a lot of money. They're going to continue to print money. Money printing has always led to inflation. And if you own the things that go up in price, you do well. Plus, there are fundamental changes taking place in the world. Electric cars use 4 times or several times as much copper and lead as regular cars. So the demand for a lot of stuff is going to be going up. And nobody's been opening lead mines or copper mines in a long time, Daniela. So we're going to see higher prices.
Looking at gold, I said we're over 2,000 an ounce. A lot of investors saying that's great, but why in this context wouldn't gold be at 3,000, 3,500, 4,000? A lot of investors frustrated with gold. Since shouldn't it be, the safe haven bid right now of choice?
Well, I own gold. I mean, I've got, got a little gold right here on the table. Got a little silver right here on the table. I'm an old peasant, and us old peasants know we better have some gold and silver when things go wrong. I'm not buying at the moment because you just pointed out it's going through the roof. If I were buying anything, I would buy silver now because it's cheaper. not buying either right now, but when they go down again, I hope I'm smart enough to buy more gold and more silver. Yes, they have lagged what many people would think, but Daniela, gold is at an all-time high, certainly in euros and most international currencies. So it's not as though gold has been sitting in the corner doing nothing. And I will buy more of both when they calm down.
Jim, you mentioned inflation, and we know the dangers of inflation, how it's brought down democracies. Do you think that the Fed is downplaying the crisis of inflation that we find ourselves in?
The Fed is a crisis, yes. The Fed has rarely been right about anything in the history of the Federal Reserve. What is it, 110 years old almost now? They've rarely been right about anything. They told us that there was no inflation, then they said it was transitory. I don't know, don't pay that much. I don't know what they're saying now. Throughout history, money printing and borrowing and spending huge amounts of money has always led to inflation. We're going to have inflation now. It's going to get worse. It won't go up every day, but it's going to get worse. And that's going to lead to higher interest rates, and it's going to lead to profit erosion in some industries and some companies. And all of us are going to have to pay more for a loaf of bread or whatever we buy.
Just on U.S. equities a second, Jim, when you do see that correction coming, what kind of forecast are you eyeing for U.S. equities?
Well, there'll be a big collapse. If it works the way I said, we have a big rally, one last big rally. It'll be a blow off, call it what you will. Many stocks will really go through the roof. And then when they start going down, Daniel, I know you've been around a while. Bear markets always hurt a lot of people, especially the stocks that have been the strongest. Go back to any big bear market, and the stocks that were very strong before the bear market go down 70, 80, 90% sometimes, even if the company survives. You know, Amazon, Microsoft, these stocks in the late 90s collapsed. We still have them. The companies are still here. The stocks are still here. But the stocks that do well going into the bear market really get crushed.
So for Jim, for the investors and all our wonderful viewers watching at home, you know, if there will be a collapse in U.S. equities, if the U.S. dollar is not safe, if commodities are soaring right now, where should one be looking to place their money?
Well, as I said before, I own U.S. dollars. I don't know how long I'm going to own them. If it has one last rally, and if stocks do, I have not sold short, Daniela, but probably, if it works the way I think it will, I will start selling short again. Now, if you know how to sell short, you can make a lot of money or lose a lot of money. But if you know how to sell short, it's a way to protect yourself and prosper in a bear market. Agriculture is a disaster. So some of the assets, some of the commodities I told you about, there are fundamental changes taking place in supply and demand. Commodities have not been in a wild bull market for a while. I mean, silver, Daniela, silver is down 60% or 55% now, 55 from its all-time high. That's not a bubble. That's a disaster for the people who own silver for a long time. So there are places that one can invest. I would say real assets, commodities, selling short, cash, but you have to have the right cash, you know, because many currencies are going to go down a lot. And if you can find markets that are depressed, I mean, maybe by then Russia will be open again. Russia will certainly be a hated market by the end of this year or next year. If it opens again, maybe that would be a place to look. I always like to look at places that are hated and that are depressed. And of course, in the last few years, nearly everything has gone up except commodities.
What are your thoughts on Bitcoin right now, Jim?
Well, a lot of people I know have been great traders of Bitcoin and made a lot of money. On the other hand, as you know, Daniela, many cryptocurrencies have disappeared and gone to zero. They don't exist anymore. But if you know about trading and you're good at it, go to it. My view, however, is that, and the reason I haven't bought or sold any, is that governments like monopoly, and they're all working on their own computer money. And when the US government says, okay, this is money now, but you can use Bitcoin if you want to, it's not going to happen. The US government is not going to say, Danielle, if you want to pay your taxes in Bitcoin, you can. If you want to buy your licenses with Bitcoin instead of US dollars, you can. That's not the way those guys think. I wish we could have an option, but no. So if crypto money is successful, I suspect it will be banned or outlawed or taxed or regulated or something. But if it's just a trading, people go to it. But I'm a terrible trader, so I don't even try.
Jim, you mentioned how the Russian market is hated in the world right now. So how do Russia and Putin move on from this?
Well, I mean, you asked the brilliant question. If you know the answer, Daniela, you're going to win the Nobel Peace Prize. You're going to end the war next week if you can figure that out. And that's the problem everybody is having right now. I am not sure why Putin is keeping this up. I'm not sure why somebody hasn't said to him. I'm not sure why Washington hasn't said, why Ukraine hasn't said, okay, we're not going to join NATO. We'll give you we'll sign a treaty that we'll not join NATO. What do we care if Ukraine is part of NATO or not? That would solve the problem. And if that happens, no, of course, for a while, people are going to be angry at Russia. Rightly or wrongly, it doesn't matter. They're going to be angry. And it's going to take a while, but that will mean the Russian stocks will be very, very, very cheap. And eventually, I presume that people would be drinking tea with the Russians again and drinking vodka and having a good time with the Russians again. I doubt if it will last forever. We had a horrible war with the Germans and the Japanese. You probably don't even remember it. Now they're our great friends. So times change, people's attitudes change. And if you buy something cheap, you usually, if you have staying power, usually make money.
Jim, just before I let you go, final thoughts for our viewers watching back at home, given these extremely uncertain times we're living in.
Well, it's everybody needs to get knowledgeable. You can watch Stansberry, read Stansberry, whatever you have to do to get knowledgeable. Please get knowledgeable, because we're going to have some very complicated times in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. A lot of countries and people are going to go bankrupt. But if you're knowledgeable about what's going on, you will become prepared. And if you get prepared, you might make a lot of money. A lot of people made a lot of money in the 30s, Daniela. It's a horrible economic disaster. But a lot of people came out of it rich. The key is to be prepared, know what you're doing, don't listen to hot tips, and just invest in what you yourself know a lot about. But a lot of people, and I hope I do survive, but a lot of people are not going to survive the next bear market.
You made me think of one final point I wanted to ask you. We talked a lot about currencies, digital currencies, central banks. What do you make of the move of certain countries adopting Bitcoin as their reserve currency? Will we see more of that? Is it a smart move? What's your take?
Well, when you say certain country, you're talking about El Salvador?
Yeah, well, others are said to be following in El Salvador's footsteps.
Yes, I did notice that El Salvador adopted Bitcoin, but I don't know of other countries. And as I said, I doubt if it's going to be a huge movement. Remember, Daniela, that if something happens to your electrical supply, that means nobody has any money if it's all Bitcoin. Remember when Texas last year had a big blizzard? The whole state electrical system closed down. That would have meant that nobody had any money. Or if in some countries periodically closed down the internet. If the internet's closed, you don't have computer money. You're out of, the government has even more control than normal. So I don't see that it's that practical, that we're not going to have at least some alternatives, whether it's silver or cash or whatever it is. I cannot see the world having 100% computer money for the reasons I've just said. Now, the governments would like it. They don't have to print the money. They don't have to transport it. They know everything about you. they'll call you up one day, Danielle, and say, Danielle, you've been drinking too much coffee this week. Stop drinking. They know everything you do, which they love. Oh my God, they love that.
Right.
I don't love it, but they love it. So they want it.
I hope that the people will be, that we won't be sheeple when, whenever the Fed doll or whatever you want to call it comes about, and understand the dangers and repercussions when it comes.
No, Danielle, the government's going to tell us how it's good for us. They're doing us a favor. And many people are going to say, this is great. This is very convenient. It's wonderful. It's easy. Until the first blizzard hits, or until the government closes you down or takes complete control of you. No, it's not easy to sell. There will be skeptics like me, crazy people like me, but they will sell it. I'm not the first person to know that many propaganda experts throughout history have realized that if the government says something enough times, people believe it. Most people believe it. Is it good? No, of course it's not good, but it's a fact. And unfortunately, they're going to impose it. But again, once the crisis hits, such as no electricity or whatever, or they close the internet down for some reason, then many people, you, I, everybody, observer is going to say, wait a minute, we cannot do that. We have to have something in our pocket that we can take to the grocery store and buy bread.
Do you think that we'll see a Chinese invasion of Taiwan next, Jim?
I do not. The Chinese have a long history, and they've had very, very, very few international wars. The Europeans have had constant international wars for centuries. The Chinese have had very few international wars. They have internal wars. They've slaughtered each other, but they have a history of being very patient. Most of the Chinese know all they have to do is wait, and they'll get Taiwan. The problem is the guy now, Xi, seems to be a little impatient and wants to do something while he's still alive. But I cannot imagine they're going to do something. I don't know anybody who would support him, not even maybe the Russians, but not many people. I don't see that it's good for China, or maybe he thinks it's good for him, and that's the problem. It's like Putin thinks it's good for him what he's doing now. Nobody else, very few other people do. But you get these guys, why did Napoleon Bonaparte invade Russia? I would like to meet him sometime and say to him, how could you have been so stupid? How could you have been so stupid? I would like to see Hitler and say, you knew Bonaparte got slaughtered invading Russia. Why did you invade Russia, you fool? Didn't you learn from history? But these things keep happening. And
we never learn from history.
Yeah, the main lesson of history is nobody learns the lesson of history. Very few people learn the lessons of history.
Jim, just one final question on Russia, I swear. Do you think a move could be for them to liquidate some other gold holdings? And if you ask, well, who would buy it? Could it be China?
Well, the Russians and the Chinese both have been adding to their gold holdings a lot in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe because they're getting ready. They know what Washington is doing as far as the US dollar is concerned. And they have been adding to their gold. Now, if it gets so bad that Russia has to sell its gold, then it's really bad. I mean, there might even be a coup if it gets that bad in Russia. I don't see Russia selling its gold yet. They got enough oil and other wheat and other things that they can sell. I suspect the gold would be one of the last things they would sell. And rightly or wrongly, they and the Chinese have been adding to their gold in recent times.
Yes. But do you think that the Europeans will keep buying oil and counting on Russia for energy, or will this cause a change?
Well, they got to buy their oil somewhere. You got some spare oil, you can sell them. The problem is there's only so much oil in the world, and Europe will buy wherever it can get it. But somebody's got, if Europe buys its oil from Libya, well, that's okay, but then the Russians are going to sell oil to other people who were buying it from Libya before. Oil is an international market, and we all need oil, we all need energy, so somebody's going to buy it somewhere. The Russians have already started cutting the prices, and that's attractive to some people.